Washington, 2018. Trade war declared. Tariffs slapped on $250 billion worth of Chinese goods. Sanctions, tech bans, export controls. The full arsenal. Now picture Washington, 2024. China's economy? Still growing. Huawei? Building phones without American chips. BYD? Outselling Tesla worldwide. The sanctions didn't work. The tariffs didn't work. Nothing worked. And somewhere in the Pentagon, in the State Department, in rooms you'll never see, they know it. Here's what your evening news won't tell you. The era of Western control over China is finished. Not ending, finished. Every tool that worked for 150 years, neutralized. Every pressure point, gone. Every leverage mechanism, useless. This isn't opinion. This is math. And the people running Western foreign policy, they've done the math too. You've watched this shift happen. When you were young, Western governments decided what happened in China. They drew the borders, set the trade terms, chose which government to recognize. Now, they can't even stop China from building islands in the South China Sea. That power didn't slip away by accident. China systematically dismantled every control mechanism the West ever used. Took them decades, cost them plenty, but they did it. And you're about to understand exactly how. Let's start with how control actually worked. Because for over a century, Western powers ran China like a franchise operation. Military dominance came first. British gunboats in the 1840s, 8 nations occupying Beijing in 1900, Japanese armies in the 1930s. For 110 years, foreign military power decided China's fate. The message was simple: do what we say or we'll make you. The Treaty of Nanking in 1842, still sitting in British archives, forced China to open ports, cede Hong Kong, pay millions in silver. Not because China agreed, because British cannons were pointed at Chinese cities. Then came economic leverage. Western powers controlled China's trade routes, customs revenues, even its currency. The Maritime Customs Service? Run by a Brit named Robert Hart for 45 years. China's own tax collection, managed by foreigners. Silver flowed out, opium flowed in. British parliamentary records from 1840 show the trade deficit Britain created. Tens of millions in silver annually, draining China's economy to fund tea purchases. Diplomatic isolation made it worse. Western nations recognized whichever Chinese government served their interests, played factions against each other, supported warlords who'd grant concessions, divided to conquer. And internal division? The West exploited it ruthlessly. When China fractured into warlord territories in the 1920s, foreign powers carved out spheres of influence. Shanghai split into zones where Chinese people were second-class citizens in their own country. That's how control worked. Military threats, economic stranglehold, diplomatic manipulation, internal chaos. For 100 years, it worked perfectly. So what changed? Start with nuclear weapons. October 16th, 1964. China detonated its first atomic bomb. 4 years later, a hydrogen bomb. You might remember that test. The Cold War was raging. American officials were shocked. They'd predicted China was years away. Here's what that mushroom cloud meant. Military invasion was off the table. Forever. No Western power would ever occupy Beijing again. The gunboat era ended in that desert in Xinjiang. By the 1980s, China had intercontinental ballistic missiles. Today, according to Pentagon reports, not Chinese claims, China has over 500 nuclear warheads. Hypersonic missiles, weapons American officials publicly admit they cannot intercept. You cannot threaten a nuclear power. That tool is gone. Economic leverage collapsed next. Took longer, required patience. When Deng Xiaoping opened China in 1978, Western economists thought they had leverage. China needed foreign investment, technology, markets. But China was playing a different game. Every factory built in China trained Chinese workers. Every technology transfer required for market access educated Chinese engineers. World Bank data shows foreign direct investment poured in, $57 billion in 2000 alone. Western executives saw cheap labor. China saw technology acquisition. By 2023, China had a $17.7 trillion economy, IMF numbers, a domestic market of 1.4 billion consumers, manufacturing capacity that produces nearly 30% of global output. The leverage reversed. Today, Western companies need China more than China needs any single Western country. Apple makes most of its products there. Tesla's most profitable factory is in Shanghai. Try sanctioning your own supply chain. Diplomatic isolation? China built alternatives. Shanghai Cooperation Organization. BRICS, now expanded to include Saudi Arabia, Iran, UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia. Belt and Road partnerships with 140 countries. When the US tried to isolate China after COVID, they discovered something uncomfortable. Most of the world didn't follow. African nations kept taking Chinese investment. Southeast Asia kept trading. Latin America kept signing deals. Here's the math that matters. The Western Alliance represents about 1 billion people. China's alternative network? Over 5 billion. You cannot isolate a country most of the world does business with. And internal division, the final control tool, died with Communist Party consolidation. Was Mao's rule brutal? Yes. The Great Leap Forward killed tens of millions. But the party delivered something no Chinese government had managed since 1839. Unity. Central control. No warlords to exploit. No competing governments to recognize. One China, one party, one foreign policy. Western governments can't play factions when there's only one faction. There was a moment Western leaders realized control was slipping, and you probably watched it. 1972, Nixon's handshake with Mao. Your generation saw it on television, the historic opening. Here's what that trip actually meant. America was admitting it couldn't ignore China anymore, couldn't isolate it, couldn't pretend the communist government would collapse. After 23 years of non-recognition, Washington came to Beijing. That wasn't America winning. That was America adapting to a new reality. Then came 2001. China joined the WTO. Remember the debate? Trade would change China. Integration would bring democracy. Capitalism would require political reform. 23 years later, China got the trade, built the world's largest manufacturing sector, kept the Communist Party, and never democratized. The taming through trade theory died. China got rich on Western terms, then rewrote the terms. Now watch what desperation looks like. 2019, Huawei banned from US networks. Result? Huawei developed its own chips. Its latest phones use 7-nanometer processors made entirely in China. The ban accelerated Chinese self-sufficiency. 2022. CHIPS Act passed. Billions in subsidies to bring semiconductor manufacturing to America. Translation: we can't compete on cost, so we're paying companies to come back. 2023. Export controls on advanced AI chips. Result? Chinese companies stockpiled before the deadline. Now they're designing around the restrictions. SMIC, China's top chip maker, is producing chips Western analysts said were impossible without American equipment. Every sanction designed to slow China down has accelerated Chinese independence. Every ban has forced innovation. Every restriction has proven that control mechanisms no longer work. And Western analysts know it. The Council on Foreign Relations, hardly a pro-China outlet, published reports acknowledging decoupling is economically impossible. Former Treasury Secretary Paulson warned that cutting China off would hurt America more than China. The people who actually understand the economics, they've done the math. The math doesn't lie. Look at what control attempts have become. Gestures, theater, sound, and fury. Sanctions that don't bite. Russian sanctions showed the limit. China kept buying Russian oil. Energy flows where money pays for it. Chinese banks kept operating. Trade found new routes. Tech bans that backfire. Every restriction on Chinese tech companies has produced a Chinese alternative. Can't use Google? Baidu. Can't use Amazon Cloud? Alibaba Cloud. Can't buy American chips? Build your own fabs. Alliance building that excludes the majority. The Democracy Summit approach writes off 80% of the world's population. India plays both sides. Southeast Asia won't choose. Africa, Latin America, the Middle East. They're taking Chinese investment and American lectures. And guess which one builds ports? Military posturing with no endgame. Aircraft carriers sail through the Taiwan Strait. China builds artificial islands with airstrips and missile batteries. Nothing changes. Because at the end of the day, no one is starting a nuclear war over shipping lanes. The tools of control have become the tools of frustration. You've watched this entire transformation happen. When you were doing Cold War duck and cover drills, China was testing its first nuclear bomb. When Nixon flew to Beijing, China was counting what it needed to learn. When Tiananmen filled your TV screen, China was recalculating, not abandoning the economic rise, but ensuring political control survived it. When China joined the WTO, Western leaders promised you democratization. Instead, China got rich and stayed authoritarian, and proved it worked. From 1949 to now, from Soviet-style poverty to the world's second-largest economy, you witnessed the most complete neutralization of foreign control in modern history. This isn't future prediction. This is present reality. Nuclear weapons mean military threats are empty. Economic interdependence means sanctions hurt both sides. Alternative alliances mean diplomatic isolation is impossible. Party unity means internal manipulation has no entry point. So here's what Western governments understand but won't say publicly. The control era is over. Not weakening, over. For 110 years, from the First Opium War to Mao's victory, Western powers decided what happened in China. For the next 75 years, China systematically eliminated every mechanism that made that control possible. World Bank data, Pentagon reports, IMF statistics. The evidence isn't Chinese propaganda, it's Western documentation of a power shift they couldn't prevent. The era of Western control over China has ended, and the numbers prove it's not coming back. The only question left is this. Now that they can't control China, what does the West do next?